A virgin of 20 years was given in marriage to the most powerful millionaire in the country, but what she discovered could cost her life. Before we begin, already subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. We would love to know. The sound of raindrops hitting against the window was the only thing that filled the oppressive silence of the room. Abigail Johnson was sitting on the edge of the bed, her fingers intertwined in her lap, trying to control her quickening breath. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and the feeling that her life had been ripped from her hands only grew stronger with every passing second. The bedroom door opened without ceremony, and Aaron Smith entered with his imposing presence. He wore an impeccable dark suit, his face expressionless and his gaze icy. "The wedding has already taken place. You are my wife now," he said, his voice low yet cutting. Abigail slowly lifted her head, meeting that gaze that seemed to pierce through her. "I didn't choose this," she replied, her voice firm despite the fear creeping inside her. Aaron took a step closer, not averting his gaze. "Neither did I, but we are stuck in this. How you feel about this situation is irrelevant." The silence that followed was suffocating. Abigail never imagined her life could change so drastically. The only daughter of a businessman who was once prosperous, she had grown up surrounded by comfort and expectations of a bright future. But everything crumbled when her father got involved in debts with the wrong man. Aaron Smith was not just a powerful millionaire. He was feared, influential, and his name carried a weight that made anyone think twice before challenging him. When bankruptcy became inevitable, despair took over Abigail's family. Her father, in a desperate attempt to avoid complete ruin, accepted the only proposal Aaron made, Abigail in exchange for the debt. The decision was made without her consent. There was no choice. There was no way out. The wedding took place in a restrained, almost cold ceremony. No guests, no party, just a contract signed between two families. Aaron didn't even pretend to show interest during the event. He exchanged vows as if closing a deal, showing no emotion whatsoever. Now there, inside that mansion that felt more like a luxurious prison, Abigail felt her new reality weigh heavily on her shoulders. "I am not an object to be bought," she murmured, staring at Aaron with contained anger. He laughed, a dry and humorless sound. "You are exactly that, Abigail. Your father sold you to save his own skin, and now you belong to me." Those words hit her like a slap. She felt a knot tighten in her throat, but refused to show weakness. "If you think I will bend to you, you are mistaken." Aaron raised an eyebrow, assessing her as if deciding whether it was worth continuing that discussion. "Do what you want, just don't forget that. While you are here, you will be my wife, and wives fulfill their roles." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "And one last thing, Abigail. Don't attempt to run away. You won't like the consequences." The door closed behind him, and she felt the weight of his words settle over her shoulders. The place was grand, with endless corridors and rooms exuding wealth, but for Abigail, all of it felt suffocating. It was not a home, but a golden cage. She explored the house in the following days, trying to get used to her new reality. Aaron, on the other hand, made no effort to make cohabitation easier. He was distant, cold, almost indifferent. He seemed not to care about her presence. However, there were moments when Abigail felt a different look coming from him. Something beyond indifference, something laden with bitterness. One night, while walking through one of the corridors of the mansion, she heard voices in the library. The door was ajar, and her curiosity prevented her from moving on without peeking. "Are you really going to keep up this charade for much longer?" asked a man she did not yet know. "She will pay for what they did." Aaron's voice was low, but carried contained anger. "But was it her who caused this, or are you punishing the wrong person?" There was a heavy silence before Aaron's reply. "Her parents destroyed my life. Now she will live in hell at my side." Abigail felt the blood run cold in her veins. What did that mean? She never knew what had truly led her family to ruin, but now it was clear that Aaron Smith not only despised her, he hated her. And worse than that, she had no idea why. The cold of the early morning seemed to seep through the slightly open window, making Abigail Johnson's skin shiver. But it wasn't just the icy wind that made her tremble. She was there, standing in the dark hallway, listening to every cutting. Word of Aaron Smith in the library. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her heart racing as she tried to process what she had just discovered. Her parents destroyed my life. Now she will live in hell by my side. Those words echoed in Abigail's mind like a hammer striking her skull. The hatred that Aaron felt for her was not just a reflection of the dirty deal made by her father. There was something deeper, darker, something she still didn't understand, but that already made her stomach churn with anguish. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor jolted her out of her stupor. Her body reacted before her mind could process, and she spun on her heels, walking quickly and quietly down the hallway. She needed to get back to her room before she was caught eavesdropping. If Aaron discovered that she had overheard his conversation, she swallowed hard and quickened her pace. The hallways of the Montenegro mansion were endless, all very well lit during the day, but at night they became dark and oppressive. The walls were adorned with luxurious paintings and crystal chandeliers that cast strange shadows on the floor. It was a sophisticated place, but cold, soulless, just like the man who kept her there. When she reached the bedroom door, her hands were trembling. Carefully, she turned the doorknob and entered, quickly shutting herself behind it. She leaned against the solid wood and closed her eyes, trying to calm her breathing. He hates me, and wants me to suffer. The feeling of helplessness was like a punch to the gut. She never wanted that marriage. She never wanted to be part of Aaron Smith's world. But somehow she was caught up in something much larger than just a debt. She needed to uncover the truth. But how? Aaron wouldn't say anything. He barely looked at her. The staff, they probably were too afraid to say anything. Her father, rage surged up her chest like fire at the thought of the man who sold her like a piece of meat in exchange for his own survival. She didn't want to. You see, him didn't want to hear his empty excuses. She was alone. The sunlight filtered through the linen curtains as Abigail awoke. She had spent the night tossing and turning in bed, trying to find some logic in the situation she was trapped in. She got up and walked to the large window in the bedroom. The garden of the Montenegro mansion stretched vast before her, with well-kept flowers and a fountain in the center where birds perched to drink water. From the outside, the place seemed like a paradise. On the inside, it was hell. She needed to get out of there, but how to escape from a man who seemed to anticipate each of her moves? "Good morning, Mrs. Montenegro." The voice behind her made her heart race. She turned quickly and found a uniformed woman holding a tray with breakfast. It was Jessica Adams, one of the mansion's servants. "I already asked not to be called that," said Abigail, crossing her arms. Jessica hesitated for a moment, but carried an air of submission, as if she had been trained never to overstep her bounds. "How long have you worked here?" asked Abigail, trying to sound casual. Jessica looked down, adjusting her apron. "A few years. So you've known Aaron for a long time." The woman nodded. Abigail stepped forward, not taking her eyes off her. "Jessica, tell me something. Do you know why Aaron hates me?" The maid's expression changed instantly. Her breath caught in her throat, and her eyes widened as if Abigail had asked something forbidden. "Ma'am, I can't. Please," Abigail pleaded, her voice dropping lower. "I need to know." The silence that settled was suffocating. Jessica pressed her lips together, hesitating. Then finally she murmured, "I shouldn't be saying this, but it has to do with Emily Davis." The name made Abigail frown. "Who?" Jessica glanced quickly at the door, ensuring that no one was listening. Then she turned back to face her. Emily was Mr. Aaron's great love. They were to be married. A strange sensation coursed through Abigail's body. And what happened to her? Jessica took a deep breath, clenching her hands. "She died in an accident caused by your parents." The last sentence hit Abigail like a brutal blow. Her body froze. "What?" Jessica looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Mr. Aaron never recovered from that. He loved her more than anything, but she died. And your parents were to blame. Abigail's thoughts whirled like a hurricane inside. Her mind, Aaron's hatred, the repressed rage, now it all made sense. He saw her as the daughter of the people who destroyed his life, and now she was bound to the man who wanted to see her pay for a crime she never committed. Her blood ran cold as she realized one thing. He never intended to let her live in peace. He was just waiting for the right moment to make her suffer. The air seemed to have been ripped from Abigail Johnson's lungs. She felt the ground disappear beneath her feet as Jessica Adams's words echoed in her mind. She died in an accident caused by your parents. The maid watched her with eyes full of apprehension, as if waiting for an explosion, an outburst of denial or despair. But Abigail Johnson just stood there, frozen, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs, trying to piece together a puzzle she hadn't even known existed until a few hours ago. "Are you sure about that?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than she'd like. Jessica Adams hesitated for a moment, then lowered her eyes. "I only know what everyone here knows, ma'am. Mr. Aaron Smith never talked openly about what happened, but the pain he carries is no secret to anyone." Abigail Johnson felt a knot tighten in her throat. She knew nothing about Emily Davis. Her parents had never mentioned any tragedy linked to the Montenegro family, but if Aaron Smith believed that they were responsible for it, then that forced marriage hadn't just been a debt repayment. It had been revenge. She had never had a real chance there. It was never just about having her as a wife. It was about seeing her suffer. That night, Abigail Johnson went down for dinner. For the first time since the wedding, Aaron Smith was sitting at the table, his eyes fixed on his phone, while a perfectly plated dish sat in front of him. The Montenegro mansion was quiet on its own, but in that dining room, the tension felt palpable. The sound of cutlery against plates was the only noise present. Abigail Johnson, however, was not willing to continue playing that game. Who was Emily Davis? She shot, without preamble. Aaron Smith's fork stopped halfway. He raised his eyes, and for a moment, she saw something different there. Not coldness, but a flash of emotion. Something dark. Something dangerous. "Be careful with the questions you ask," he warned, his voice low and heavy with threat. Abigail Johnson didn't look away. "You blame me for something I don't even know what it was. At least tell me the truth." He dropped the cutlery onto the table, his fingers closing into fists. "What do you want to know? How was it to see the woman I love die? How was it to hold her lifeless body in my arms? How was it to watch her family go unpunished?" Each word hit Abigail Johnson like a sharp blade. She opened her mouth to respond, but Aaron Smith leaned forward, his eyes sparking. "I never wanted this marriage, Abigail Johnson, but when your father offered you to me, I realized that fate was finally giving me a chance to settle the score." She felt her skin crawl. "You wanted to punish me?" He smiled, but there was no humor there. "Exactly." A suffocating silence filled the room. Abigail Johnson felt her fingers tremble in her lap, but she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. So she lifted her chin. If you think I'm going to just accept this, you're mistaken." Aaron Smith leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I don't need you to accept it. I just need you to understand one thing. You are my wife, and I decide how this relationship will work." The air grew heavy between them. Abigail Johnson felt the anger burning inside her. She didn't know exactly what her parents had done, but one thing she was sure of: she was not an object of revenge, and if Aaron Smith thought he could break her, he was about to find out that she wasn't that fragile. The next morning, Abigail Johnson decided she could no longer be kept in the dark. Had her parents committed a crime? If they were guilty for Emily Davis's death, why had they never told her anything? She needed answers. With her heart racing, she waited for the right moment to act. Aaron Smith would be out for the day, according to Jessica Adams, which would give her time to explore the mansion without interruption. She started with the library. The room was immense, with dark wooden shelves reaching up to the ceiling, and an aroma of old books in the air. If there was anything about Aaron Smith's past there, it would be in this place. She rummaged through the shelves, opened drawers, examined papers. Nothing. Then she spotted a locked cabinet. If Aaron Smith kept it locked, it was because he was hiding something important. Abigail Johnson's heart pounded in her chest as she looked for a way to open it. After a few minutes of searching, she found a keyring thrown on a side table. She tried one key after another until finally hearing the click of the lock opening. With her breath held, she opened the cabinet. And there, at the bottom, she found a wooden box. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out and removed the lid. Inside there were photographs, and then Abigail Johnson saw Emily Davis for the first time. She was beautiful. She had a sweet smile, bright eyes, and in her arms was Aaron Smith. Younger, lighter, happier. But what really made Abigail Johnson catch her breath was what she found at the bottom of the box. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with time. She picked up the paper and read the first few lines. "Tragedy on the road. Young woman dies in an accident caused by a renowned businessman." Her father's name was there. Aaron Smith's name was there, too. And then Abigail Johnson saw the details. Emily Davis's car was hit by another vehicle at high speed. The driver, Abigail Johnson's father. The blood ran cold in her veins. She couldn't breathe. "What do you think you're doing, Aaron?" Smith's cutting voice made her freeze. She looked up and saw he was standing in the doorway, his face completely closed, his eyes dark like a storm about to explode. He walked slowly toward her, his steps echoing in the silent library. "I asked, what do you think you're doing?" he repeated, his voice low, menacing. Abigail Johnson clutched the newspaper between her trembling fingers. I needed to know the truth." Aaron Smith ripped the paper from her hands, crumpling it without looking away from her. "And what did you think of the truth, Abigail Johnson?" His voice was loaded with irony and bitterness. She swallowed hard. "I didn't know. My father never told me anything." He laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "How convenient." She felt the anger rise within her. "I'm not my father, Aaron Smith. Do you want to blame me for what he did?" Aaron Smith stared at her for a long time. And then, in a low and cruel voice, he replied, "I do." Abigail Johnson felt a shiver run down her spine. In that moment she knew that Aaron Smith had no intention of letting her escape his revenge. And worse than that, she had no idea what he was capable of doing to her. The silence between them was suffocating. Abigail Johnson's fingers still held the crumpled newspaper, her heart beating so hard it seemed it would burst from her chest. Aaron Smith was there, standing in front of her, with a look filled with something she couldn't tell, whether it was hatred, contempt, or a contained rage about to explode. He ripped the clipping from her hands and threw it back into the box with brutality. "You had no right to touch this." "Yes, I did," she retorted, feeling the indignation boiling inside her. "You locked me in this house without giving me an explanation. You treated me like an object of revenge. And now I discover that all this anger is because my father caused the death of the woman you loved?" Aaron laughed, but it was a cold laugh, devoid of humor. You talk as if that's a small thing." "It wasn't my fault." He narrowed his eyes. "You carry his blood, that's enough." The words were a blow. Abigail felt her legs weaken, but she would not allow Aaron to see her fall. She straightened up, swallowing the pain, taking a deep breath. "Do you think punishing me will bring Emily Davis back? Do you think turning me into your prisoner will change the past?" Aaron took a step closer, until they were so near she could smell his woody perfume mixed with contained anger. "No, but it makes me sleep better at night." The weight of those words made Abigail feel a chill run down her spine. He wanted her to suffer, and he had no intention of stopping. The days that followed were torment. Aaron did not speak to her again after that night in the library, but his presence was constant, suffocating. He was always nearby, but never looking directly at her, as if ignorance was a punishment. The mansion staff treated her with respect, but also with a strange care, as if they feared crossing an invisible line. Abigail noticed the pitying glances directed at her when they thought they were not being watched. She was not just the boss's wife. She was the woman he despised, and everyone there knew it. The worst of all was the feeling of being surrounded by an invisible cage. Aaron never needed to lock doors or place security to stop her from leaving. She knew that any attempt to escape would be futile. She had nowhere to go, and even if she did, Aaron would not allow it. One night, while she tried to read a book in the library, Abigail heard footsteps behind her. She turned and found Aaron leaning against the doorframe, watching her. "What is it?" she asked, crossing her arms. He walked slowly to the drinks cart next to the fireplace and poured himself a glass of whiskey. "Are you comfortable?" Abigail frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a sip of the drink, then set the glass on the table. "You've been here for weeks. You have a luxurious room, staff at your disposal, first-class food. But still, you look at me as if I were a monster." She laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Because you are." Aaron was unfazed. On the contrary, his gaze became even sharper. "Then why haven't you tried to escape yet?" Abigail's heart leapt. She did not respond, and Aaron noticed. "Because you know there's no way out." He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers. "You can walk through this house as much as you want, pretend that you are planning a way to escape, but deep down, you know there's nowhere to run." Abigail maintained a firm stance, but her stomach churned. He was right, but she would never admit that out loud. Aaron leaned in a little closer, so close that Abigail felt his warm breath against her skin. "Accept your reality, Abigail. You belong to me." Anger boiled inside her, and before she could control herself, she raised her hand to slap him. But Aaron was quicker. He grabbed her wrist in midair, squeezing hard enough to stop her from completing the movement, but not enough to hurt her. His gaze was pure challenge. "Is that what you want? For me to react? For me to scream? For me to panic?" Abigail whispered, her eyes flashing. "I won't give you that pleasure." Aaron held her gaze for a moment, then released her wrist, and stepped back, picking up the whiskey glass again. "We'll see." Then he turned and left, leaving her there, her chest heaving in contained fury. That early morning, Abigail had an uneasy sleep. She tossed and turned, Aaron's words hammering. In her mind, he wanted to break her. He wanted her to surrender to pain, to despair. But Abigail would not give him that satisfaction. That was when she heard a noise in the hallway. She got up slowly, her heart racing. The mansion was silent at night, and any sound was easily perceptible. She walked to the door and opened it carefully, peering outside. Aaron was there. But something was wrong. He was leaning against the wall, one hand pressing against his abdomen, the other gripping the doorknob of his own room. His face was tense, his jaw clenched. "Aaron?" He raised his eyes to her, and it was then that Abigail saw something she had never witnessed before. Pain, not emotional pain, but physical. Aaron tried to straighten up, but stumbled slightly. Abigail didn't think. She crossed the hallway and held him by the arm before he collapsed. "What happened?" He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "It's nothing." But his skin was cold, and Abigail noticed something dark staining his shirt. Blood. Panic surged up her throat. "You're hurt. Don't get involved." In this, Abigail, he tried to push her away, but his body gave in and she had to hold him tighter. "Shut up and let me help you." Without waiting for permission, she threw his arm over her shoulder and helped him walk into the room. When she turned on the light, Abigail saw the damage better. The side of Aaron's abdomen was bloody. He had been attacked. But by whom? And why? The powerful and untouchable man who tried to destroy her was now there, injured and vulnerable. Abigail Johnson felt her throat tighten. Her heart raced, but there was no time for hesitation. "You need a doctor," she said, her voice heavy with urgency. "No!" Aaron Smith tried to pull away, but his body weakened, and he had to lean on her again. "Aaron Smith, for God's sake, you're bleeding." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing heavily as if gathering strength. "I don't want anyone involved in this." Abigail bit her lip, her mind spinning with thousands of possibilities. Aaron Smith was a powerful man, surrounded by enemies. If he was injured and didn't want help, it meant that this wasn't just an accident. It meant someone wanted to hurt him. "Were you attacked?" He didn't answer. He just gritted his teeth, trying to stay upright. "If you don't want to call a doctor, then let me take care of this." Aaron Smith let out a weak, bitter laugh. "You want to take care of me after everything I did? I'm not like you." She helped him walk to the bed, and he sat down heavily, bringing his hand to the wound. The expression of pain contorting his face was proof that he was worse off than he let on. "Where's the first aid kit?" Abigail asked hurriedly. "In the bathroom, second drawer." She ran there, opened the indicated drawer and grabbed everything she needed: gauze, alcohol, bandages. When she returned, Aaron Smith was leaning back on the bed, his breathing irregular. Abigail knelt beside him and began to unbutton his shirt. He watched her movements in silence, but didn't try to stop her. When she pushed the fabric aside, she held her breath. The cut was deep, on the side of his abdomen. The skin around. It was reddened, blood slowly oozing out. "What happened to you?" "I already told you, stay out of this." She huffed, irritated. "You have a huge gash in your belly and don't want to tell me anything." Aaron Smith closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting against the pain. "I dealt with a problem." But the problem reacted. Abigail furrowed her brow. "What does that mean?" He opened his eyes and stared at her. "That there are people who would love to see me dead." Those words sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. She didn't respond. She just picked up a clean cloth, soaked it with alcohol, and brought it to the wound. "This is going to hurt." Aaron Smith let out a small laugh. "Not more than I'm already feeling." Abigail pressed the cloth against the cut, and Aaron Smith flinched, letting out a low grunt. His body tensed under her touch, but he remained still. "Who did this to you?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the injury. "Doesn't matter." "It does matter. What if they try again?" Aaron Smith took a deep breath, seeming exhausted. "I know how to handle my enemies, Abigail." She finished cleaning the blood and began to bandage the area. His muscles were stiff under her fingers, and for the first time, Abigail realized how strong Aaron Smith was. He had always been an imposing presence, but there, So close, so vulnerable. He seemed different. He seemed human. She bit her lip at the thought. No, she couldn't feel sorry for him. He was the same man who treated her like an object, who saw her as a trophy of revenge, but at the same time he was there, injured, allowing her to take care of him. Why? Done, she said, tying the bandage carefully. But you need to rest. I don't have time for that. Oh, of course, because you're Superman, aren't you? Abigail crossed her arms. You're losing blood, Aaron Smith. If you don't rest, you're going to get worse. He looked at her, and for a brief moment something sparkled in his eyes, something Abigail couldn't identify. Then, to her surprise, he let out a tired sigh. Fine. She raised her eyebrows. You agreed with me? Don't get used to it. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Lie down, I'll stay here. Aaron Smith hesitated for a moment, then settled back on the bed, closing his eyes. Silence filled the room. Abigail observed the man in front of her. Even injured, even exhausted, he still seemed strong, but there was something new there, a crack in his armor. And Abigail knew that if she wanted to find a way out of that prison, she needed to understand who Aaron Smith really was, and more importantly, she needed to discover how far he would go to protect her or destroy her. The clock on the nightstand read 3 a.m. Abigail Johnson was sitting in the armchair next to the bed, her eyes fixed on Aaron Smith. He was sleeping deeply, his chest rising and falling in a heavy rhythm. His face, always rigid and unyielding, now looked more human, more real. This was the first time she had seen him vulnerable. The man who tormented her, who treated her like a burden, was now there, hurt, unconscious, given up to his own weakness. And as much as she knew she shouldn't, Abigail felt a knot tighten in her chest. Hate and compassion fought within her. She couldn't forget what Aaron had done. She couldn't forget that he kept her there against her will, that he saw her as a piece of revenge. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pain he carried. He lost the woman he loved. And no matter how cruel it was, she now understood why. But understanding didn't mean accepting. She was not guilty for what her father did, and she would not pay for a crime she did not commit. Taking a deep breath, Abigail got up from the armchair and walked to the door. She needed a moment for herself to process everything, but when she opened the door to leave, she came face to face with 2 men in black suits standing in the hallway. Shock coursed through her body like electricity. "Ms. Johnson," one of them said in a respectful but firm tone. She frowned. "Who are you?" "We are here to ensure the safety of Mr. Smith." Abigail felt a shiver run down her spine. "He's fine. He doesn't need anyone here." The men did not move. "We have orders not to let you leave the room." Anger grew inside her like a furious fire. "What? It's an order from Mr. Smith." The words were like a slap, even hurt. He still wanted to keep her trapped. Even after everything, Aaron continued to control her. Frustration took over her. She felt her jaw tighten, her fists clench at her sides. "If I wanted to escape, I would have already done it," she snarled. The men remained still. Abigail knew that arguing would be useless. So she huffed, turned on her heels, and went back into the room, slamming the door shut. The noise made Aaron stir in bed. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking a few times before focusing on her. "What's wrong?" Anger pulsed in Abigail's chest. "You set up security at the door of your own room to keep me from leaving." Aaron sighed and rubbed his face. "I don't want you getting involved in something you don't understand." "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was already completely involved in this," she retorted, crossing her arms. "After all, I'm your wife, aren't I?" Aaron sat up slowly, placing his feet on the ground. The wound on the side of his abdomen still made him moan in pain, but he kept a stern expression. "This isn't a game, Abigail, And you think my life is what? A game for you to get revenge on the past?" He narrowed his eyes. "You don't understand anything. Then make me understand." Silence filled the space between them. Aaron held her gaze for a long moment, his dark eyes like a storm. Then finally he said, "Someone wants to kill me." The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. Abigail blinked, her heart racing. "What?" Aaron got up, walking slowly to the minibar in the corner of the room. He opened the door, took a bottle of water, and took a sip before continuing. "This isn't new. I've known they were watching me, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But this time they got too close." Abigail felt her stomach churn. "Do you know who it was?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But I will find out." She swallowed hard. As much as she wanted to hate him, as much as she wanted to keep her distance, she couldn't ignore the fear rising in her throat. Someone wanted Aaron dead, and being his wife, not even against her will, that meant she was also in the crosshairs. "Do you think I'm in danger?" He looked at her, and his gaze softened just a bit. "As long as you're near me, yes." The confession made something inside her twist. "And if I leave?" Aaron's eyes hardened instantly. "That's not going to happen." She felt frustration rise again. "So you prefer to keep me here, knowing that I could be a target?" He stepped closer, his expression heavy with suffocating intensity. "I prefer to keep you here, because if someone wants to hurt you to get to me, I need to be close to stop it." Abigail's eyes widened. "So that's it. You only want to protect me because using me for revenge doesn't make sense if I die." Aaron didn't answer, and his silence was all Abigail needed to understand the truth. She stepped back, feeling her heart weigh heavily in her chest. "You really are a monster." This time, Aaron didn't deny it. He just watched her leave the room and lock herself in the bathroom, where she finally allowed the tears she had been holding back for so long to spill down her face. The Smith mansion never felt so suffocating, and now, besides being a prisoner of a man who hated her, she was a prisoner of the fear of something much worse. Someone wanted Aaron dead, and if they tried to reach him through her, she knew she wouldn't have a way out. The early morning hours passed, but Abigail Johnson could not sleep. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, she hugged her knees, her heart heavy. The tears had already dried, but the confusion inside her only grew. Someone wanted Aaron Smith dead, and no matter how much she tried to convince herself that she didn't care, that it wasn't her problem, an uncomfortable voice inside her mind whispered the opposite. If Aaron Smith died, what would happen to her? Would she be freed? Or would she just end up being another collateral damage? And worse than that, why did the idea of him dying bother her so much? She hated Aaron Smith, or at least wanted to hate him. But seeing him there, injured, vulnerable, something inside her hesitated. A knock on the door startled her. "Abigail Johnson," Aaron Smith's voice. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain her composure. She slowly stood up and opened the door. He was standing there with his shirt partially open, the bandage covering the wound on his abdomen. His face was still pale from exhaustion, but his eyes were as intense as ever. "You've been locked in here for far too long." She crossed her arms, maintaining a stern expression. "I need your permission to be alone now." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I don't want to argue with you." "Great, because I don't want to argue with you either." Abigail Johnson tried to pass by him, but Aaron Smith grabbed her arm, preventing her. The grip was firm but not aggressive. "I need you to listen to me." She pulled her arm back, taking a step away. "What? Are you going to tell me that I have to stay here, locked up, waiting for your enemies to try to kill you again?" He didn't answer immediately. After a moment, Aaron Smith simply said, "Yes." Abigail Johnson felt her stomach churn. "This is madness." He took a step closer. "It's the only option. For you." She pointed a finger at him, frustration spilling over. "For me, the only option should be to run away from this damn house and never look back." His eyes sparkled with something Abigail Johnson couldn't decipher. "Do you really think you can just leave?" His tone was a challenge, and at that moment, Abigail Johnson realized he expected her to give up. He thought she had already accepted her fate. But he was mistaken. The next day, Abigail Johnson woke up with a single thought: to get out of that house. She spent the day observing the mansion's routine, memorizing the employees' schedules, the corridors' paths. She knew the security. Guards were always nearby, but there were moments when the vigilance was more relaxed. She waited until nightfall. When she was sure that Aaron Smith was in the office, she gathered her courage. She exited the room with light steps, taking deep breaths to keep calm. She descended the stairs slowly, her eyes alert to every detail. If she could reach the garden, she would have a chance. But as she turned the corner, going somewhere, Abigail Johnson's heart raced. She turned on her heels and came face to face with Aaron Smith, standing a few meters away, arms crossed, his expression impassive. He already knew. Of course he knew. He always knew. She tried to hide her frustration, but Aaron Smith noticed and smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. "Did you really think I wouldn't know you would try to escape?" The anger bubbled within her. "I am not your prisoner." Aaron Smith slowly advanced, his steps calculated. "But you are not free either, Abigail Johnson." She felt her breath quicken. "What do you gain by keeping me here? What exactly do you want from me?" He stopped, inches from her. "I want you to understand." "Understand what?" Aaron Smith's gaze darkened. "That you belong to me." The air grew heavy. Those words made something inside her revolt, but at the same time awakened something she didn't want to admit. A shiver, a hesitation. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream in his face that she would never belong to anyone. But Aaron Smith didn't give her that chance, because in the next instant he did something Abigail Johnson never expected. He held her face in his hands and kissed her. The kiss happened before Abigail Johnson could react. Aaron Smith's lips touched hers firmly, warm and demanding, but without haste. It was such a shock that for a moment her body froze. Her mind screamed to push him away, to run, to hate it. But her body did not respond as it should. The heat of his touch made something inside her tremble. Aaron Smith's fingers held her face with firmness, but in a way that did not hurt her. On the contrary, the contact was careful, as if he were testing her limits, waiting to see if she would back down. And when Aaron Smith deepened the kiss, sliding his lips over hers with a torturous slowness, Abigail Johnson realized that there was no turning back. She should push him away. She should hate him. But in that moment, all she could do was feel. His taste, the way his body molded to hers, as if in some absurd way they had always belonged to that moment. Her fingers closed against his chest, and Aaron Smith let out a low sigh, almost like a warning. His other hand slowly slid along the curve of Abigail Johnson's waist, pulling her a little closer. It was enough to break the spell. Reality returned like a cold wave, drowning her. She hated him. He was her jailer. And this should not be happening. With a start, Abigail Johnson pushed Aaron Smith away with force. He stepped back a few paces, his breathing irregular, but he did not seem surprised by her reaction. Abigail Johnson brought her hand to her lips, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. "What? What do you think you are doing?" Her voice came, out trembling, but she couldn't tell if it was from anger or something worse. Aaron Smith stared at her for a moment, his jaw tense, his eyes still loaded with that darkness that made her stomach churn. "I should be asking you the same," he said, his voice hoarse. "You kissed me, and you responded." Abigail Johnson's heart leaped in her chest. She opened her mouth to deny it, to scream that he was wrong, but no words came out. Because he wasn't wrong, and she hated that. "Go to hell, Aaron Smith." She spun on her heels and ran up the stairs, almost feeling her body still warm, still affected by something that shouldn't have happened. She locked herself in her room, breathless, the taste of the kiss still on her lips. That couldn't happen again. It couldn't. But deep down, Abigail Johnson knew she had already crossed the point of no return, and Aaron Smith knew that too. The next day, Abigail Johnson avoided Aaron Smith at all costs. She stayed locked in her room until she was sure he had left to take care of his business. Only then did she go downstairs for breakfast. But Jessica Adams, the maid who always brought her food, noticed something was wrong. "You look pale, Mum. Are you feeling well?" Abigail Johnson picked up the teacup with trembling fingers. "I'm fine, Jessica Adams." The woman hesitated, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Abigail Johnson, on the other hand, felt like she was suffocating. Aaron Smith's kiss had messed everything up. She should be focused on escaping. She should continue to hate him. She should maintain her stance. But now he had put something else between them. And worst of all, she knew that kiss had not just been a momentary impulse. There was something more. Something Aaron Smith did not want to admit. Something he was trying to hide as much as she was. That night, Aaron Smith returned late. Abigail Johnson was in her room, already dressed for bed, when she heard voices in the hallway. Curious, she approached the door and opened it a crack. Outside, Aaron Smith was talking to a middle-aged man, dressed in a well-tailored suit and a serious expression. "I warned you this would happen," said the man. "It wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a warning," Aaron Smith replied. "Are you sure?" Aaron Smith was silent for a moment. "No." The man sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Aaron Smith, whoever did this tried to catch you at your most vulnerable moment. If they got this close, it means there is someone inside your house passing information." Abigail Johnson held her breath. Someone inside the mansion was betraying Aaron Smith. The man continued, "You need to reinforce security, and you need to decide soon what you will do with your wife." Abigail Johnson felt her heart race. Aaron Smith took a deep breath and then said something that made her freeze. "I have already made my decision." The man furrowed his brow. "And what would that be?" Aaron Smith did not immediately respond. He ran a hand over his face, clearly exhausted. Then, in a low tone, almost like a secret, he said, "I can't let her go." Abigail Johnson felt a shiver run down her spine. She slowly backed away from the door, her heart racing. What did that mean? Why could he not let her go? Was it just for revenge? Or was there something more? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. That kiss changed everything, and now she no longer knew if she wanted to run away, or if she wanted to understand what was really behind Aaron Smith's coldness. Abigail Johnson closed the door carefully, leaning against the cold wood. Her heart raced so fast it seemed about to explode. "I can't let her go." Aaron Smith's words echoed in her mind like thunder, bringing more questions than answers. He couldn't let her go. Why? Was it just for revenge? For the obsession of seeing her pay for something she didn't even know about until a few days ago? Or was there something more? She slid to the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. That house was becoming her prison. But the worst was realizing that little by little it was also becoming her labyrinth, and Aaron was the enigma at its center. The next morning, Abigail Johnson took a shower, got dressed, and went down for breakfast. Her body still felt the remnants of the kiss from the night before, and that annoyed her more than anything else. She wanted to erase that moment. She wanted to pretend it never happened, but her own body betrayed her. As soon as she entered the dining room, she felt the air grow heavier. Aaron was already there, sitting at the head of the table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked relaxed, but Abigail knew that nothing about Aaron Smith was relaxed. He was a man made of steel, and everything about him was calculated. When she pulled out a chair and sat down, he didn't even raise his gaze. "You heard my conversation last night?" Abigail swallowed hard. He didn't ask, he stated. She adjusted the napkin in her lap, trying to maintain her composure. "If you don't want me to hear, stop speaking so loudly." Finally, he raised his eyes to hers. His dark eyes pierced her like blades. "I'm not going to let you go, Abigail Johnson." Her stomach twisted, but she kept a firm expression. "You don't have that right." He calmly set the cup down on its saucer. "I do." "Why?" Aaron leaned back in his seat, analyzing her. "I could say it's because you are my wife, because we have a contract. But that would be a lie." Abigail leaned slightly forward. "Then tell the truth." His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "The truth is that you're involved in this now." She felt a shiver down her spine. "Involved in what?" "In everything." He stood up, slowly walking around the table. "Whoever tried to kill me knows you're here, and knows that if they want to hurt me, they can use you." The hairs on Abigail's arms stood up. "So, I'm just a shield for you?" He stopped behind her so close that his presence burned. "You are more than that." His voice was low, heavy with something she couldn't decipher. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to regain control of her own breathing. "And what am I, Aaron?" Silence. He didn't answer, and that left her even more confused. Later that day, Abigail Johnson was in the library, trying to distract herself, when Jessica Adams entered, anxious. "Ma'am, there's a man at the gate. He says he needs to see you." Abigail frowned. "Who?" He said his name is Robert Miller. Her heart skipped a beat. Robert was a close family friend, one of the few who remained after her father's ruin. She stood up quickly. "Where is he?" Aaron ordered the guards not to let anyone in without his permission. "I want to see him." Jessica hesitated. "Mom, take me to him, Jessica." The maid looked around, ensuring no one was watching, and then nodded. "Come." The two left the library and walked through the halls, crossing the garden to the large iron gate of the mansion. There was Robert on the other side, wearing a dark suit and a worried expression. As soon as he saw her, he approached. "Abigail, thank God." She grasped the gate's bars. "What are you doing here?" Robert looked around before answering. "You need to get out of there now." Cold crept up Abigail's spine. "What are you talking about?" "Your father. He sent me here." She felt her stomach churn. "My father? He discovered something, Abigail. About Aaron. About Emily. Davis's death." Her heart nearly stopped. "What?" Robert glanced around again, as if afraid he was being watched. "Your father swears he wasn't the one who caused the accident. He said someone tampered with his brakes that night." Abigail's eyes widened. "What?" "He believes it was a setup, that someone wanted to frame him." Abigail's world spun. Her whole life, Aaron had made her believe her father was to blame for Emily Davis's death. And now Robert was there, saying it could have been planned, that someone wanted Emily Davis to die. "Robert, are you sure about this? Your father is willing to talk to you, but you need to get out of there." Abigail opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, a metallic click echoed through the air. She turned slowly, and there was Aaron a few meters away, with a gun in hand. His expression was not one of fury. It was something much worse. It was betrayal. disappointment, and Abigail knew in that instant that something inside him had broken. He thought she was trying to escape, and this time there were no excuses. "Yeah, come in," he ordered, his voice low and lethal. "Aaron, Now, Abigail." Her heart hammered in her chest. She looked at Robert, who seemed about to charge at the gate, and then back at Aaron. For a second, she saw the pain there, saw that he didn't want to do this, but he had been betrayed before, and now he believed he was being betrayed again. Abigail had no choice. She took a step back and entered. Aaron slammed the gate shut behind her with a crash. "You made your choice." She felt a knot tighten in her throat. "It wasn't what you're thinking." "Don't say anything else." He holstered the gun inside his jacket and walked into the house. Abigail stood there, frozen, feeling the weight of it all collapse upon her. Now Aaron no longer trusted her, and a man like him, when he felt betrayed, he became more dangerous than ever. The silence inside the Montenegro mansion was overwhelming. Abigail Johnson walked behind Aaron Smith, her hurried steps trying to keep up with his. "Aaron, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. He didn't stop. He didn't look. Aback. The only answer she received was the sound of his shoes echoing through the marble corridors. When they reached the office, Aaron opened the door and entered without ceremony. Abigail followed behind, but as soon as she passed through the doorway, he turned on his heels and slammed the door shut, locking it. The bang made her heart skip. "You lied to me." His voice was low but filled with contained fury. Abigail shook her head. "No, I didn't lie. You tried to run away." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control the storm inside her. "I wasn't going to run away, Aaron. Robert came here because he has information about what happened to Emily Davis." Finally, he looked at her, and Aaron's eyes were as cold as ice. "And you think he's telling the truth? Don't you want to know?" He let out a humorless laugh. "And you want to tell me that suddenly your father turned into an innocent man?" "I don't know." She ran her hand through her hair, feeling the frustration burn inside her. "But don't you think it's worth investigating? You spent years blaming me for something that might have been a setup." Aaron fell silent. For a moment, she thought her words had broken that wall of hatred between them, but then he walked over to the table and picked up a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid before taking a sip. "You don't understand, Abigail." "Then make me understand." He set the glass down on the table and finally looked up. "I spent years living for a single purpose." She held her breath. "Revenge." "Yes," Aaron nodded. "And now you want to tell me that everything I built was based on a lie." Abigail stepped closer, anger and pain mixed within her. "Do you think I would do this if it weren't serious?" Aaron held her gaze, and for the first time he hesitated. "If I let you see your father, will you leave?" The question took Abigail by surprise. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to answer, and Aaron realized. He laughed, a low, almost sad sound. "You don't even know what you want anymore." She felt a knot tighten in her throat. He was right. She wanted the truth, but did she want to leave? She thought so. But then why did that thought make her chest ache? "I want the truth," she said, her voice lower. "Just that." Aaron remained silent for a long moment. Then, without saying anything, he walked to the table, picked up a phone, and dialed a number. "Schedule a meeting with Caleb Brown," he ordered. Abigail held her breath. He was talking about her father. When he hung up, Aaron stared at her. "You have your chance. We're going to find out the truth." Hope blossomed in Abigail's chest. But something in Aaron's gaze made her shudder. He still didn't trust her. And what if the truth wasn't what he wanted to hear? she knew she could be walking into a much worse fate. 2 days later, Aaron took Abigail to a secluded location. It was a large, elegant yet discreet house. Aaron's security guards were spread around, watching every entrance. When they entered, Abigail saw her father sitting in a leather armchair. He was thinner, older, and his eyes carried a weight she had never seen before. "Daughter." He stood up. "Daddy." She stepped forward, but Aaron held her arm. "First, I want answers," he said. Her father sighed and sat down again. "I swear I didn't kill Emily Davis." Aaron crossed his arms. "The car that hit hers was yours." "Yes, but I wasn't drunk, as they said. I was driving normally until I realized something was wrong." The brake failed. Abigail felt a shiver run down her spine. "You never said that before." Caleb lowered his head. "Who would believe me?" Aaron was still. "Do you have any proof?" "No, but I found something recently." "Die isn't sitom." "A joke." Caleb shook his head. "You know it's not." Abigail couldn't see what was on the paper. "What is it?" Aaron fell silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Abigail, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. Pain, anger, and something that seemed very close to despair. He threw the paper onto the table. Abigail picked it up with trembling hands and read. Her heart stopped. The document was a technical report, an expert analysis on her father's car. Someone had sabotaged the brakes. The accident was planned. And at the end of the report, there was a name, the name of the person who ordered the car to be sabotaged. When Abigail read it, her vision blurred. She looked at Aaron. He was staring at the floor, his fists clenched, and then he whispered, "It can't be." The name on the paper, the one responsible for Emily Davis's death. It wasn't Caleb Brown. It was someone much worse. Someone Aaron could never imagine. Someone who had been close to him all along. The true murderer of Emily Davis was... Aaron Smith's world collapsed. The name on the report was a ghost from his past, a nightmare he had never suspected. He felt his stomach churn, his fingers tightening around the paper until it crumpled. His breathing was heavy, out of rhythm. Abigail Johnson watched each of his movements, feeling the tension spread in the air like electricity before a storm. "Aaron." Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. But he did not hear her. Aaron Smith's eyes were fixed on the name, in the report, as if it were a death sentence. And in a way it was. The true perpetrator of Emily Davis's death was William Thompson, his own uncle. "This is a lie." Aaron's voice was cold as steel. His father, Caleb Brown, shook his head. "I wish it were." Abigail took the papers and read once more, feeling her blood run cold. William Thompson, brother of Antonio Thompson, father of Aaron Smith, a man who had always lived in the shadow of the family empire, always serving but never commanding. He had never accepted being second. He wanted power, and for that he needed to destroy Aaron. "He wanted to finish me off," Aaron murmured, still processing. "He sabotaged Abigail's father's car so that the blame would fall on him. He made me believe I lost Emily because of her family." The pain in his voice was something Abigail had never heard before, and her heart tightened. "He got exactly what he wanted," Caleb continued. "He made you consume yourself in hatred. He made you lose years of your life seeking revenge against the wrong person." Aaron slowly turned to Abigail. His eyes were loaded with something she had never seen. Guilt. "I destroyed you," he whispered. She swallowed hard. "You hurt me, but deep down, I think I always knew you were hurt too." He closed his eyes for a moment, the pain crossing, his face like a sharp blade. Then suddenly he opened them again. "He is still here." Abigail's eyes widened. "What?" "William. He is inside my house right now." The silence that followed was heavy with danger. Aaron spun on his heels and left the room like a hurricane. Abigail and Caleb followed, both of their hearts racing. They knew this would not end well. Upon entering the mansion, Aaron found William in the office. The man was sitting calmly, sipping a glass of whiskey, as if nothing was wrong in the world. But when he raised his eyes and saw Aaron there, he knew he had been discovered. "Aaron," he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You look disturbed." Aaron stopped in front of him, his fists clenched. "It was you." William maintained a neutral expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emily, you killed her." Silence filled the room. William swirled the glass in his hand and let out a small sigh. She was not the target. The anger rose in Aaron's body like fire. "You were going to kill me." "Not kill," William corrected calmly, "but ruin you. Put the weight of guilt on your shoulders. I knew that if Emily died, you would never be the same." Aaron felt his hand tremble. All this time, he thought his pain came from the cruel fate that separated him from Emily, but now he knew the truth. It was all planned. His suffering was calculated. He turned his back, running his hands over his face, trying to control the anger, trying to prevent himself from doing something he couldn't undo. It was at this moment that William moved. Fast. Abigail saw it first, the glint of the gun being drawn from William's waistband. She screamed, "Aaron, watch out!" He spun around at that instant. The shot echoed through the office. For a moment, Abigail thought it was all over, but then William fell to his knees. His eyes were wide, his hand trembling as it touched the red stain spreading across his chest. Aaron stood still, holding his own gun. His expression was not one of anger. It was one of liberation. William toppled to the side. The silence that followed was heavy, definitive. It was the end. The days that followed were chaotic. William Thompson was declared dead. His attempted murder against Aaron came to light, along with his connections to criminals. The truth about Emily was finally revealed, but the damage had already been done. A week later, Abigail was in the mansion's garden when Aaron found her. He was different. He looked tired, as if years of weight had finally fallen from his shoulders. "You are free," he said. She blinked. "What?" He ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath. "I should never have kept you here. I should never have made you pay for something you didn't do." She remained silent. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry." Those words were a shock. The great Aaron Smith apologizing. Abigail crossed her arms, watching him. "And now?" He gave a small smile, but it was a sad smile. "Now you can go." Abigail's heart tightened. She wanted that, didn't she? She looked at the mansion, at Aaron, at the man who once was her jailer, but who now seemed lost without her. And then, suddenly, she realized she never wanted to run away. She wanted to be free. But somehow her freedom always led her back to him. She took a deep breath. "What if I don't want to go?" Aaron raised his eyes, surprised. "What?" She stepped forward. "What if I want to stay?" He was silent for a moment, trying to understand if he was hearing right. "After everything I did?" "After everything we went through," she corrected. And then, for the first time, Aaron Smith seemed human. He seemed a man who could love again, and she knew he needed her as much as she needed him. He held her face between his hands, his dark eyes shining. "Are you sure?" She smiled, a smile of someone who finally found her place. "I am." This time, when Aaron kissed her, there was no pain. There was no revenge, just two hearts that, despite everything, chose each other in the end, and this time it was for love.